Hi friends, thanks so much for joining me again for another photo editing tutorial. I'm really excited because in this one I'm going to be sharing with you how we can up our creative game in Lightroom using a really simple but powerful plugin called Luminar. If you're already familiar with Luminar, you'll know just how powerful its AI tools are, but if you're new to it, in this video I'm going to show you how Lightroom and Luminar can work in conjunction with each other to really enhance our photo editing game. We'll be working on this photo of this awesome waterfall here in New Zealand, and I'm going to show you how I first do a Lightroom edit. Due to a heavy rainfall, the water had taken on quite a murky kind of look to it, so we're going to correct that in Lightroom. So I'll show you how to do that and make basic edits within Lightroom. But once you've got that photo, how do you take it to the next level? What can you do to actually take it even further? And that's where Luminar comes in, and I'm going to share with you some tips on things like adding a sun flare, which looks really cool. We can add like a light layer of fog, and we're also going to add one of my favorite little tools, which is the mystical filter, and it just adds like a dreamlike quality to your photos. Now here's a quick caveat, I have pushed this photo quite far, probably further than I would normally do, but I've done that for a reason. I really want you guys to actually see what's possible, and I want you to be able to see the adjustments I'm making. So I've been slightly heavier handed than I would normally be, but here's another great thing with Luminar. What you can do is, because everything's layer based as well, if you've like pushed everything and it's like, oh, that's a little bit too much, rather than having to go in individually to the sliders and reduce them, you can actually reduce the opacity of the whole look itself. So it's really cool. So without further ado, let's take a look at how I process that photo. So within my library here, we've got some different variations of a shot I did of this waterfall, which is just an absolutely stunning waterfall, but this is the version that we're going to work on today. So if I expand this, you'll see that this is part of a 5 series bracketed exposure. So we have a very dark image here, and the idea of that is just making sure that I'd captured enough detail in the highlights so that I could bring detail into the waterfall if I wanted to. But in actual fact, I think if we work with just this image here, we'll probably find that there is enough dynamic range within the raw file to actually control these highlights, which at the moment are completely blown out. I think we can probably recover them, and the same with the blacks here, we can actually bring out some detail there. So let's start our process and jump into the develop module. Everything's currently on reset at the moment, so we're going from ground zero. So I'll show you my complete workflow. The first thing I'd do is come into browser profile, and I leave all of the Adobe profiles alone and jump straight into camera matching. Now, depending on which camera brand and which model you're shooting with, your profiles will be different to what I see. I'm shooting on a Nikon D850, so these are specific to my camera, but you'll have something similar. And I like to work with either a neutral or a flat profile. Now, they don't look very punchy, they look a little washed out if you compare that to the landscape one. But I actually feel that if you start with a flatter profile, you've got more control over your image and what you want to do with it. See, before we've done anything, straight away, if I roll over this flat version, you'll see that we get detail back in the highlights and the shadows. So let's start with that and close our profile. And from here, let's start to work with our tone. A general good practice is to work from top to bottom in Lightroom. So we're going to start up here with our most important stuff like the exposure itself. I'm going to bring that down just ever so slightly. Contrast I'll leave for a second, but we're going to bring the highlights all the way to the left just to see what we can do. And straight away you can see that we can recover all of those highlights. So if I double click on the little slider arrow, and that will just reset it. So that's a good little tip to know. But basically, if we bring that nearly all the way to the left, we can see that we're getting a lot of that detail back. I don't like to take things too far because things can quickly take on almost like an HDR, high dynamic range kind of look, but not in a good way. So I don't like to push that highlight slider all the way. We can certainly boost the shadows up, and if I start to bring that to the right, or take it all the way to the right, you'll see that all that detail that initially we couldn't see, there is detail right there. So that's all accessible to us through that one raw file. You'll see that, as I said at the beginning, I shot 5 files with differing exposure for each one. That's just me covering my bases, because I hate to be in this amazing location, have access to getting a really great photo and then coming back with an exposure that just was incorrectly exposed. I don't want to take the shadows all the way, but I do want to start to see that detail in here, top left and center right, but I do want to see that detail that was hiding away before. The fact that the image is quite flat at the moment, we can address that with either our contrast slider or work with the tone curve, or maybe a bit of a combination of both. For now, we're going to look at the whites and blacks. Now, I like to make sure that my histogram is pushing all the way fully to the left for the blacks and all the way to the right so that we have a pure white point. At the moment, we don't. The histogram is just dropping off shy of the white point and shy of the black point. And a good way to see whether you're getting a pure white and pure black or not is just to turn on these little warning markers here. Now, if I grab the white slider and bring it to the right, straight away you start to see a little red warning here. And that is because we've turned this little triangle icon on. And that's just showing us where we're clipping whites. So up here in the sky, that wouldn't bother me. And what I'd like to do is just bring that further until we just start to see the red appear in the waterfall. Probably around there, that's quite nice. And bring the blacks down, and as you can see, if I push the blacks all the way sort of to the left, you're starting to see all of this blue warning. It's just saying, hey, you've lost all detail in the blacks, that is now pure black. So if I turn that off, you can see that that has reached pure black. And for me, in a landscape photo, and probably most of my photos to be honest, I always want to retain just a little bit of detail within the photo. I don't like to just absolutely crush out my blacks or blow out my whites, because I want people's eyes when they look around my photo to always find an area of interest. If they want to look into a little area here, they will be able to see detail. So let's turn the marker back on here, and you can see we've got no pure blacks there, so there's none of that blue warning, but up here we are just starting to clip to black. So if you want to push the blacks down slightly until we're just getting a little bit of black here, maybe bring it up just slightly, we can now address the top left hand corner by putting an adjustment mask over there and actually just boosting the exposure just in that one area of the picture. From here, I'm just going to have a look at the image full screen. So I'll just click off of our adjustment mask, press F, and now we can see the image full screen and just sort of see where we're headed, and it's looking pretty good so far. If we want to reintroduce some contrast, now that we've actually moved our sliders around here in the highlight, shadows, whites and blacks, now if we play with the contrast, we can actually see exactly what's happening in terms of the contrast of the image, but now we know that we're not actually losing any detail in the image. There's detail right throughout. The fact that I'm losing a little bit of black here, a little bit of white, I'm not bothered about that. So now let's turn these warning markers off and move on to the next section, which is presence. The texture section, I really don't like this in Lightroom. I find if we push that to 100%, it just makes the image look a little too crunchy. It's not a nice look in my opinion. So I'll turn that off. The clarity, on the other hand, I prefer this, but again, if we push it all the way to 100 for this particular image, it's way too much, but maybe we just want to ease in a little bit of it just for a bit of definition. So somewhere around that 21 mark, nice. Dehaze, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's just too much. If I'm pushing that to the right, again, it's just taking our blacks too black, so I'm not really wanting to put too much dehaze in. I think maybe somewhere around that mark would be quite nice. One thing I'd really like to do is actually change the colour of the pools of water around here. Because there was a recent rainfall, it churned up all the mud further upstream, and basically that has left just a layer of kind of browny silt over everything, and it looks pretty icky. Some of the lakes within New Zealand have what's known as rock flour in it, and that's when glaciers grind away at the rocks, and that just the sediment is just held in the water and can create a really vibrant turquoise colour, and that's what I'd like to introduce here. So although it's not here in the original photo, I'm just using some artistic license. So to change the colour of the water, what I'm going to do is use a radial mask. So if we just click the circular radial filter icon there and just click down in the water and start to drag out, you'll see nothing's happening yet, but that's fine. What we're going to do is now push the temperature to the left, so we're going towards the blue tones, and if we add some green, that will push that into a more magenta look. So I'm pleased with the colouring of this, but I don't like the way it's affecting all of this area. So you've got a couple of options. Rather than using the radial filter, you could use the brush and kind of brush that in, or a quicker way is what we'll do here, which is apply the radial filter in an ellipse that's kind of covering the water that we want it to, and then we're going to use the range mask in color mode, select the eyedropper color range selector, and now what we can do is actually just drag our eyedropper over the color that we want it to affect, and you see straight away that it took away that effect from the waterfall just here, and it's just sort of playing into this water that's in the deeper pool now. Guys, I really hope you're enjoying following along with this one. Hey, do me a favor, if you're getting something out of this video, please go ahead and consider subscribing to the channel, and I'd absolutely love a thumbs up if you are enjoying it, so thank you very much. If we want to blend that in even more, we can just use the feathering and push that further to the right so we get a softer edge to that ellipse that we will have created. So I'm pleased with what it's done with the pool of water here, but now we need to do the same effect over here. And the quickest way that we can do that is just right click on this and go to duplicate, or control click if you're on a Mac. So now I have two of these, and now I can drag this one over to the right hand side, and if I want to make this slightly smaller, which I do, I'm just going to go hover over one of these control points and hold the shift key, and that will constrain the proportions of that ellipse. And if you want to rotate your ellipse, you can do that. You can grab just outside one of those control points, and then you'll get this arrow and you can click and rotate. So I try and just make sure that my ellipses and my editing covers the areas that I want it to, and then just bleeds over slightly so that you get a soft transition. If you feel that the effect is still interfering with certain areas of your image that you don't want it to, so for example, if we turn our mask on down here in the bottom by ticking that, you can see that the red area, it's still affecting up here on the rocks and therefore the moss as well, which I really don't want it to do. So what we can do is actually just erase that area. So if we come to the brush tool here, click on erase, and now we can start taking that effect away. So the red overlay is just showing us where this filter is being applied. So I'm just going to remove it from this rock area here, and now we'll uncheck the show selected mask overlay, and now that's much better. It's taken away from the rock here, and we can do the same with this one. We can just click this one here, and you can either paint directly onto that, or you can choose to show that overlay like we did before. But if we go with that and just show overlay, you'll see that we've removed the effect from up here. Cool, now I'm happy with that. Now I'm finding that this green piece of moss here right in the foreground is a little too bright, but I'm going to deal to that later within Luminar. So if we close down this radial filter here, and we'll see what else we can do with this image before we take it into Luminar. I could play around with the tone curve, and I could boost things up just slightly just to brighten the image, and I think that's quite a nice step. I could come into the color drop down box and start playing around with the color just to reduce the green here, but I want to have more precise control over that rather than affecting the whole image, and I can do that through Luminar much better using masks. One thing we will do is just have a quick look at detail, and I think we'll sharpen this ever so slightly. I mean, it's a pretty nice sharp image. It's off a huge 46 megapixel sensor, so we don't need to add too much sharpening into this, but if we just push that around that sort of 75 mark, and perhaps just play with the radius just to see how that works. And normally I like my radius left around 1 pixel. That works well for me and my lenses, but you might want to play around with that. You might find different settings suit you and your lens better. And I'll just have a little look around the image and just check that you're happy with what you've done in terms of sharpening. You can use this little turn off noise reduction and sharpening toggle here, off and on, and just keep your eyes on the sharpening areas. So look at this moss here. This is quite a good area to look at. Off, and let's turn that on, and that's quite a nice amount of sharpening. From here, I would say that's about all we can do in Lightroom in terms of improving this image, and this is where Luminar comes in. I think in terms of giving yourself the ability to improve your images, it is such a fantastic piece of software. You can use it as a standalone software instead of Lightroom or Photoshop, or you can use it as a plugin, as a filter, and that is what I'm going to show you here. My idea is that we're going to create a slight sun flare coming through the gap in the trees up here, and I'm also going to dull down this bright green bit of moss just here. Perhaps we're going to see if we can draw the attention more to the waterfall, perhaps with some vignetting, but let's take a look at what we can do. And there's also a filter within Luminar called Mystical, and it just creates a really beautiful dreamlike kind of quality to your photos. And if that's a look that you like, yeah, you're really going to enjoy that. So let's right click on this and we're going to go to Edit In. And if you have Luminar, Luminar 4 will automatically be in this list as an option. You don't have to do anything. Once you install it, it's going to appear for you within Lightroom and within Photoshop. Once you've clicked that, you'll see this dialog box here, and you can either edit as a TIFF format, or what I like to do is choose PSD. The color space, I would recommend ProPhoto RGB. It's the largest color space, so it's going to have the most latitude for pushing your photo around and not degrading it in any way. It's important to keep your bit depth at 16 bits rather than dropping it to 8 bits. And for the resolution, that's not really too important, to be honest, because it's not going to resample your image. But I usually like to work to a 300 DPI. But like I say, that's kind of irrelevant for this. But let's click Edit, and Luminar is going to open up. So currently Luminar is on version 4.2, and they've made some big advances since version 4. Now this is the really exciting bit for me, because here we get to be much more creative, and the creative possibilities are so much more vast than what you can do with Lightroom. The tools that you have at your disposal are split into 4 categories. We've got our essentials through this tab here, or we can go to creative. We can go to the portrait mode or the pro mode. For this example, pretty much everything we'll need will be in either essentials or the creative tab. And just like in Photoshop, the good thing with Luminar is you can work in layers. So here you've got access to add layers, and you can then start to compound effects on top of effects. So that gives you really limitless creative possibilities. Let's first of all jump into this Essentials tab. And so AI Enhance, this is such a cool tool. If you've done nothing to your photo and you start to drag this to the right, this is way too much, and you'll find that most of the tools here, if you push them all the way to 100, they're a very strong effect. But it's a good thing to do just to eyeball what it is that that particular tool is doing, and then you can ease it off to a point where you feel it's more appropriate. But basically the AI accent tool is an all-in-one slider for fixing things like contrast, improving vibrancy and saturation. It can correct exposure. It's AI driven, so it's basically doing all the thinking for you. But for us in this example, being the creative folk that we are, we want to do the thinking ourselves. And so let's jump into AI structure. And basically the AI component of this structure is it's doing what clarity does within Lightroom. But here's the really key difference. If you had people and faces, skin texture within your photograph, the AI component actually masks out the people and their skin so that you only get the structure in the areas that you want it. So that's actually really, really clever, really cool. And as we've already added our clarity in Lightroom, I'm just going to double click that to send that back to 0 as well. I think the main thing that we'll do here is actually just create a vignette, so we darken the edges and bring our attention more towards the center point, which is the waterfall itself. So let's click vignette, and I'm going to show you why I prefer this vignette to Lightroom's version. So what we can do is we'll crank the amount really high, -100. If we go the opposite way, it adds a white border, but I prefer darkening the edges so that our attention goes to the brighter points in the middle. If we click the advanced settings, now we can start to fine tune the look of our vignette. And by pushing this amount all the way to -100, we can see exactly what it's doing. And then once we're happy with it, then we'll ease that back off. So in terms of size, let's bring that in slightly more, and we're going to feather the edges so it's a softer transition from the center of the vignette to the outside of the frame. And this is a great feature. We can actually add an inner light. So rather than it just darkening the edges, we can actually brighten the center of the vignette. So it's kind of like a double whammy. You are saying, hey, look at this brighter part in the middle and don't look at the darker part around the edge. As I say, this is way too much at the moment. So now we can come back, get our amount slider. And if I put that back to 0, you can see we've got a kind of uniform brightness right throughout the whole image. But if we start to bring the amount of that vignette back in, we can see that that's darkening those edges off quite nicely. So we can look at our before and our after, and I really like the way that's controlling the viewer's eye just to look more at that waterfall. And the other really great thing with any of Luminar's tools is you actually have access to a mask. So if you want to take this effect away, which I do from just up here where we're going to actually brighten this and put a sun flare, we're going to go edit mask and we can just brush that area out. So we're going to erase this effect, so choose erase, and we can use the bracket keys on our keyboard to make our brush bigger or smaller. And I'm just going to paint out the darkening effect from just up there in the sky. So now when we turn our vignette off and on, you'll see that it's not actually affecting this area up here. And if you've got other areas that you feel like it's gone too dark, like maybe this area through here, we can just paint that out. Maybe up in this top left corner as well, it's just getting a little bit too dark. So now we can look at our before and our after, and I think that's a really nice step forward. You can also choose the opacity with which you're painting, so we could reduce this to say 26% and just ease that vignette off of the blue, turquoise blue water, just so that we're not pushing that too dark either. So let's look at our before and after. We're darkening around the edges, which is great, but we're not pushing things too dark so that they're black. Now let's jump into the creative tab, and this is so much fun in here. There are so many great tools to play around with, but I'm going to focus on just a couple. One will be sun rays, the other will be mystical. And I think actually we're going to also add a little bit of fog just around the bottom of the waterfall. If we're introducing sun rays, the only way that you really see sun rays is that if there's particles in the air, in the atmosphere, to actually catch the rays of the sun. So we're going to introduce a slight fog effect around here. But first things first, let's open sun rays. Let's boost the amount up so we can actually see what's going on. And now we're going to click place center. So at the moment, it's just picked an arbitrary point on our picture. And as we move the sun rays around, you'll see that as it goes over bright areas, the sun rays start to poke through. So we obviously want to put our sun rays up here somewhere. As you can see, as I push it up beyond the frame of the canvas, you can actually position your sun rays off frame, which is quite nice. And now you can play around with these sliders. I would also recommend opening up the advanced settings. Because this is quite a strong effect, it's good to have access to all of these options so that you can fine tune it exactly how you want it. Just like with the vignette, we are working at 100%. The amount is all the way up at its full intensity so that we can see exactly what we're doing, and then we can back it off to a point where we feel it's more believable and we're happy with it. So currently I feel like things are a little bit too hot, a bit too bright coming through here. So let's see what we can do with all of this. The sun ray length allows us just to push those rays further towards the edge of the frame or reduce them tighter on the sun. But I want them to push quite far into the frame. And the penetration slider controls how much penetration you get. What a cool slider to have. So basically that's how much light is pouring through the different areas, or how strongly the light can penetrate through leaves, etc. So as I start to push that to the right, you'll see that it starts to come through more of those areas. But we don't want it to push through too much, so I'm just going to ease that back off. And the number of sun rays, you'll see as I take that to the right, it's adding more and more rays, and as I take it to the left, it's taking the rays away. I actually feel that by taking the number of sun rays all the way to the left and putting it at 0, you actually get a slightly more believable kind of look. From here, what you can do is use this randomized slider. It keeps the same settings, but it's just going to throw different looks into your picture. So I quite like this one that I've just stumbled upon. And what I'm going to do is just reduce the amount now. And the next thing you can do to actually control the look of these sun rays is actually edit the mask. And this time, rather than removing the rays, what I'm going to do is actually paint them back in where I want them. So the plus icon is next to paint. We're going to make a much bigger brush. We are going to have a 50% opacity, and you'll see we've got none of that effect, but now as I paint, I can actually paint those rays in. So I've got much more control about where that sun ray bleeds to. Now we've got the impression of the sun just starting to filter through from the back of the waterfall here. So I'm happy with that now, so we can just close the sun rays section down, and now let's come into mystical. Now I'm going to push this pretty heavy as well. As you see, as I go to the right, we've got a lot of glow going on, and as the filter says, it's a kind of mystical kind of look. Too much, but I like it. So let's bring it back to, I don't know, where are we going to put this? Let's see, somewhere around that 19 mark. Let's try that off and on. Again, it's subtle, but it's just adding something, and this is something that you just can't do inside of Lightroom. So I really love this as a plugin. Same for Photoshop. You can do this kind of thing using layers, blur the layer, turn it to soft light, things like that. A, you've got to know how to do all of that stuff, and B, there's a lot more steps involved, whereas this is as easy as just grabbing a slider and playing around with it. So I really love the simplicity of the simplicity of Luminar, and it gives you that ability just to play around, get creative, and you can see the results really quickly. If you want to see the before and after of everything you've done, I really love this too. Click the eyedropper tool. So this was from Lightroom, and this is our edit at the moment. So we've got Lightroom version and just a little bit extra with Luminar. The last thing I was going to show you was just adding a little bit of fog. So what you can do is just grab the slider and push it to the right, and to start with you think, well, that looks like the worst filter ever. But the key to using the fog filter is you have to use a mask. So if we click the edit mask drop down again and choose the brush, we can come up, and again we're going to paint, and let's paint with a lower amount, something like 20. And here we go, we're just going to click once, and that will activate the mask. And what we can do now is just along where the bottom of the waterfall comes down, we're just going to paint in the fog. So we can put in quite a bit along here, and then again we can just use our amount slider just to reduce it once we're happy with it. Let's put a little bit on this line here too. So if we turn it off and on, we can see that we've got a hazy fog along there, and we can now just reduce that amount just ever so slightly. Although we're taking this photo in a more creative and artistic kind of direction, I still want that to have a sense of believability. I know we're right on the threshold with this, and I have taken it really far, probably further than I perhaps normally would. But part of that is making sure that you guys can see the effects that I'm applying. So here we go, that's off and on, and that's just one more tool that you have at your disposal that you don't have in Lightroom. The ability to mask things out is just so useful. One more thing you can do is use layers as well. So we're going to take care of this green area here on this moss that just really catches your eye, and we're going to do it as a layer. So if we come up here, this is the layer icon, and we just click the plus icon here, add new adjustment layer. And now we've got access to all those tools that we had before, and we can just sort of compound that on top of what we've already done. But basically we are just interested in the Essentials tab, color, and what we're going to do is come to the advanced settings, and we can sort of choose the yellow and greens just to address this, and then mask it over the top. So let's come into yellow and bring the saturation down, and maybe even the luminance slightly. And let's do the same with the greens. Let's bring the saturation down and just darken it slightly as well. Let's take the saturation even further. So you can see that's affected the whole image, but I'm really not too worried about that because we're going to be able to just paint that back in over this moss here. So let's get our brush, and we're going to click to start painting and just do a few brush strokes over there. I've just got my mouse held down and I'm just painting away, painting away. Now if we turn that off and on, you can see that we've really reduced the saturation of that green on that rock in the foreground. And I think that's quite a nice thing to do, just so that our eye doesn't go straight to this rock being the most important thing in the frame. Now we're more drawn to the beauty of this waterfall. Now I'm happy with the sort of creative look that we've got going on here, but if you want to do something more, which is a bit of color grading, you can also do that in Luminar, which is really nice. You can just add yourself another layer. If you want to be more organized than I'm being here, you can rename your layer. We'll call it color grade. And then through the creative tab here, we've got access to color styles, which are lookup tables, very similar to profiles really, but it's a nice way to do it here. Once you've done all your color correct editing, you can now come in here. As you roll over these different color grades, you can see exactly what they're doing. So for example, if I wanted Long Beach, I just click that. You can choose the amount with which it's applied, so that's quite a strong intensity of it, don't like that, but that 30% that it opens up at, that's quite a nice amount. So this is our before and this is our after, and you've got a whole heap of different lookup tables that you can apply. So the sort of creative color toning possibilities are pretty much endless, because what you can do as well is apply one lookup table, one color style, and then if you want to double up with something else, you can add another layer and do that. So you can just keep going indefinitely until you've created something that is just absolutely unique to you. And when we're happy with what we've done, we just click apply, and that image is now going to be exported straight back into Lightroom. Depending on the amount of changes that you've made and how many tools you've used, the longer it will take for Luminar to actually render that file, save it as a PSD and bring it back into Lightroom. So there you go, Luminar's done that for us, and it's opened up our edit back into Lightroom, so we can look at our before version, which is still here within Lightroom, and that was our initial edit, and it's a nice edit. It's more photorealistic, but if you're wanting to push things more creatively, we've been able to take it to this with Luminar. So that is one of the reasons I absolutely love having Luminar there as a plugin, because it just opens up so many options for me. For what it offers in terms of a standalone program and all the tools that are packed into it, I think it's excellent value for money, and you can get hold of it. There's a link on the screen now, and you can use a discount code, which is @Sky10, and that will give you a discount at the checkout, providing they haven't already got promo on. So there you have it, guys. That is our photo edit, showing you how to combine the creative possibilities of Luminar with Lightroom in one cohesive workflow. So I really hope you've enjoyed that and got something out of it. If you follow this channel, you'll know that I am a big fan of Luminar, but if you're new and you want to try this software, I've got a link for you, and you can download a free trial of that. And if you want to invest in it, personally, I think it's excellent value. It is a standalone software, and it can be used as a plugin, as I've shown you here, for Lightroom or for Photoshop. So it really just adds another level of creative possibilities for you. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I really look forward to seeing you in another video. Hope you're all staying safe out there. See you soon.